What if a routine traffic stop exposed decades of corruption? A federal judge was driving to her niece's wedding in Birmingham, Alabama. She was dressed like an ordinary woman, no government vehicle, no security detail, just driving her Honda Civic like any regular person. When she neared the small town of Fairfield, she noticed a police roadblock ahead. 3 or 4 police officers were standing on Highway 78, and in the middle stood Sergeant Devon Mitchell wearing his uniform. He signaled with his hand for the woman to pull over. She pulled her car to the side of the road and parked. In a stern voice, the sergeant asked, "Where are you going, ma'am?" The woman calmly replied, "I'm going to my niece's wedding." Sergeant Mitchell looked her up and down. No woman was up. 52-year-old distinguished black woman whose name was Judge Raina Washington. Then, laughing, he said, "Oh, going to eat and drink at your niece's wedding, huh? But you were speeding through our town, and I don't see your seatbelt on properly. Come on now, you'll have to pay a fine, 'kay?" One woman's silence unraveled a corrupt empire. Sergeant Mitchell began pulling out his citation book. Raina had realized what his real intentions were and that this was just an excuse. She said, "Officer, I haven't broken any traffic laws." "Oh, lady, don't try to teach us the law." He glanced at a deputy standing beside him, then looked back at Raina and said, "We need to teach her some respect." Suddenly, the sergeant grabbed Raina's arm roughly. "It's too much attitude, huh? When the police say something, you're supposed to quietly comply." Raina's arm throbbed from his grip, but she composed herself. Anger was visible in her eyes, but she remained silent. The officer in charge, Sergeant Mitchell, laughed and said, "Still got that attitude in those eyes. I've dealt with plenty like her. Time for a proper lesson." A deputy stepped forward and said, "Sarge, let's take her to the station. We'll give her the full treatment there. Then she'll learn how to talk to police officers." One deputy grabbed Raina's purse and said, "Come on, get in the patrol car." Raina pulled back and said in a sharp tone, "Don't you dare put your hands on me, or the consequences won't be good." The sergeant grew even angrier. He told a deputy, "Look at that arrogance." A deputy stepped forward, grabbed Raina Washington's shoulder, and tried to push her toward the patrol car. Raina cried out, but still she didn't reveal her identity. She wanted to see how low they could go. Then one officer, in anger, kicked her car door and loudly said, "Acting all high and mighty, huh? Now we'll show you what happens when you disrespect the badge." Judge Raina Washington now fully understood what was about to happen to her and how low these people could stoop. There was rage in Sergeant Mitchell's eyes. He shouted loudly, "I've seen many smart ones like you come through Fairfield. Do you want to challenge the police today? We'll show you. Take her to the station. We'll teach her there." Still, Judge Washington remained silent. She showed no intention of revealing her identity. She wanted to see just how far they would go in abusing their authority. How far could they go with their corruption? Sergeant Mitchell was now frustrated. Standing before him was a woman who had been grabbed, pushed, and humiliated, whose car had been kicked. Yet she still stood there with dignity intact. No screaming, no begging. Sergeant Mitchell thought, "Let her get to the station, then I'll figure out how to break this stubborn woman." This wasn't just anger. This was rage boiling deep within. The sergeant laughed and said, "Now she's getting quiet. Let's go to the station. We'll see how quiet you stay there." As they entered the Fairfield police station, Sergeant Mitchell yelled loudly, "Hey, where is everyone? We've got a special guest today who needs an attitude adjustment." Judge Washington still said nothing, just kept looking at the station walls, observing how they treated innocent people who never dared to raise their voice against authority. Then one deputy leaned toward Sergeant Mitchell and whispered, "What's the charge, Sarge?" "Tit that." Sergeant Mitchell casually replied, "Speeding, no seatbelt, resisting arrest." "Write whatever you want. We just need to break her spirit. Don't ask too many questions." Raina was hearing everything but still didn't speak a word. It's like she wanted the story of this abuse to spill from their mouths. The sergeant sat down. at his desk, tapping a pen on the metal surface, then looked up at Raina and asked, "Name, address. Who's going to bail you out?" Raina remained silent. The sergeant repeated, "Didn't you hear me? What's your name?" Still, Raina's silence stood like a stone wall. Then the sergeant slammed his hand on the desk so hard that the sound echoed throughout the entire station. And he shouted in anger, "Didn't you hear me? Tell me your name right now." Raina slowly turned her face and replied, "Mrs. Sarah Johnson." The sergeant looked at her and smirked. "Oh, smart lady, huh? You're used to lying to police. But remember, if you get too clever, it'll cost you big. One wrong move and you won't even get time to regret it." Judge Washington was then forcefully thrown into that filthy holding cell where two other women were already sitting. One of them looked at her and asked, "Sister, what did they get you for?" Raina gave a faint smile, but said nothing. She was just observing how rotten the entire system had become. If a federal judge could be locked up for no reason, then imagining the condition of regular citizens wasn't hard at all. Raina now sat in the corner of that dark cell, watching, listening, and understanding every corrupt act. Sergeant Mitchell then fabricated a false report and said put charges of disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct on her. He slammed his hand on the file and said, "Process this quickly." One deputy asked, "But, Sarge, we don't have any real evidence of these charges." The sergeant laughed and said, "In this station, evidence isn't brought in. It's manufactured." A while later, a deputy came in and roughly grabbed Raina's arm. Just as the sergeant was about to continue his abuse, a commanding voice came from the doorway. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned around. At the door stood Captain Jerome Williams. His reputation was slightly better than the others in the department. He looked inside, saw the woman's condition, and a frown appeared on his forehead. "What's happening here?" he asked. Mitchell smiled nervously and said, "Nothing, Captain. Just some woman from Birmingham acting too smart. We're teaching her some respect." Captain Williams looked at Raina carefully. Her behavior and composure didn't seem like those of an ordinary citizen. He asked, "What are the charges?" Mitchell got nervous. "Sir, she was speeding and got hostile during the traffic stop." Williams felt suspicious. He asked Raina, "Ma'am, what's your name?" Raina stayed silent. Mitchell laughed and said, "Captain, she won't even give her real name. Been lying since we brought her in." Captain Williams now became fully alert. He ordered a deputy, "Put her in a separate cell. I want to question her myself." Mitchell was surprised, but Captain Williams sternly replied, "I'll handle this personally." On his orders, Raina was moved to another cell, even smaller and more isolated than the last. Raina glanced around. In one corner was a broken bench, and the smell of desperation hung in the air. Oh, she was seeing the real face of this corrupt system even more clearly. Every moment she understood better how justice had become just paperwork. And power games. Then a deputy came running and said, "Captain, there's a convoy of black vehicles outside." Mitchell flinched. He asked, "What kind of vehicles?" The deputy replied nervously, "Sir, federal government cars." Mitchell rushed outside, and the moment he looked at the vehicles, his eyes widened in shock. He hurried back in and whispered to Captain Williams. Williams, irritated, asked, "What happened?" "Who's here?" The deputy, shaking, replied, "Sir, the U.S. Attorney General is here." Mitchell's face turned completely pale. Captain Williams also became alert because now the matter had reached the highest federal level. The Attorney General stepped into the station, and anger was visible in his eyes. He looked at Mitchell and asked in a sharp voice, "Sergeant Mitchell, what kind of operation are you running here?" Mitchell, flustered, replied, "Nothing unusual, sir. Just routine police work." The Attorney General picked up the arrest file from the desk and read it carefully. A deep frown appeared on his forehead. Then he looked toward the holding cells and asked, "Who is the woman you arrested?" "Sir, just some troublemaker who wouldn't cooperate during a traffic stop." The Attorney General asked, "Do you have any legitimate evidence for these charges?" He asked again more firmly, "Do you have any evidence whatsoever?" Now Mitchell was completely trapped. The Attorney General walked directly to the holding cell and asked the woman, "Ma'am, what is your name?" And for the first time, Judge Raina Washington gave a slight smile and said, "The Honorable Judge Raina Washington, Federal District Court, Northern District of Alabama." Complete silence spread through the entire station. Everyone's faces turned ashen. Mitchell's hands and legs started trembling. All the other deputies stood in shock. The ground beneath Mitchell's feet vanished. The officer, he thought, was just another black woman to harass was the federal judge who presided over cases in the entire Northern District of Alabama. She was not just any citizen. She was the Honorable Judge Raina Washington herself, the woman who had been grabbed on the street, whose car had been kicked, who had been thrown into a cell like a common criminal. And as soon as this revelation came out, chaos erupted in the entire station. All the deputies froze in shock. The Attorney General looked sharply at Sergeant Mitchell and angrily said, "Mitchell, how dare you place false charges on a federal judge?" Mitchell tried to say something, but before he could, Captain Williams, standing nearby, shouted, "Sir!" I told him something seemed off about this arrest. Now Mitchell was completely isolated. Then Judge Washington, in her calm but authoritative voice, announced her verdict. "Sergeant Mitchell, your career in law enforcement is over. You're under arrest for civil rights violations, false imprisonment, and abuse of authority." Hearing this, Mitchell felt like he couldn't breathe. The other officers turned their faces away from him. Captain Williams immediately shouted, "Deputy Johnson, arrest him," and read him his rights. But just then, Mitchell pulled out a folded document from his pocket, smiling as he said, "Wait, Your Honor, take a look at this first, then do whatever you want." He showed the paper. Both the Attorney General and Judge Washington looked at him intently. Mitchell said, "Here's my retirement paperwork. I submitted it 3 days ago. Now, no matter how angry you are, you can't destroy my pension." The entire station fell silent again. Judge Washington took the paper and examined it. The Attorney General, narrowing his eyes, looked sharply at Captain Williams and said, "Go verify if this document is legitimate." Williams checked the computer records, lifted his head, and said, "Sir, it's real. But his retirement doesn't take effect for another week." That means he was still an active officer when he committed these crimes. His pension is now forfeit, and he faces federal criminal charges. Judge Washington looked him in the eye and said, "Your new address will be the same type of cell where you put innocent people." The Attorney General nodded in agreement. As two deputies stepped forward to arrest him, Mitchell played his final card. "Wait, Your Honor, I'm not the only one involved. You think all the blame is just mine?" Then he pointed toward the other officers in the station and said half of them were in on it. "We've been running this scheme for years." Several officers' faces lost all color. Captain Williams began looking at each one, realizing the scope of the corruption. Judge Washington looked at the Attorney General and said, "Now we'll have to clean out this entire department. No one involved will be spared." The Attorney General replied, "As you recommend, Your Honor, everyone will be held accountable." The moment those words were spoken, it felt like lightning had struck the station. Outside, local news reporters who had followed the federal convoy began setting up their cameras, sensing that something major was happening inside the station. When they learned that an entire police department was being investigated for civil rights violations, they immediately started broadcasting live updates. A black SUV pulled up and stopped in front. The door opened, and the FBI special agent in charge stepped out. He looked around at the scene: federal agents, local police, and media crews. "How long has this corruption been going on?" he asked the Attorney General. But both the attorney General and Judge Washington stood with grim expressions. At that moment, Judge Washington looked directly at the FBI agent and said, "Agent Davis, this investigation needs to go deeper. I suspect this pattern of abuse extends beyond just this department." Captain Williams immediately pulled out a thick file and handed it to Judge Washington. That file contained evidence of misconduct that reached into the county sheriff's office and even the district attorney's office. Judge Washington held the file and said to the FBI agent, "Here, all their corrupt practices are documented. This goes much deeper than we thought." Sweat started forming on the FBI agent's forehead. As he realized the scope of the investigation that was about to unfold, without delay, the Attorney General announced loudly, "I'm calling for a federal task force to investigate civil rights violations throughout Jefferson County. Every officer, every official who participated in this systematic abuse will face federal charges." The entire station was stunned. For the first time, someone had publicly challenged such widespread corruption at the local level. As soon as the federal investigation was announced, a storm of change swept across Jefferson County. The story reached national news networks. CNN, NBC, and Fox News all picked up the story of the federal judge who exposed systematic police corruption by going undercover. Even the governor of Alabama was briefed, and from the state capitol came direct orders: cooperate fully with the federal investigation and ensure complete transparency. Within the next week, more than 30 police officers, 8 sheriff's deputies, 2 assistant district attorneys, and several city officials were arrested across Jefferson County. The entire power structure that had enabled this corruption began to crumble. The local community, which had suffered under this corrupt system for years, finally began to speak out. Citizens came forward with stories of harassment, false arrests, and abuse that had been covered up for decades. Judge Washington's actions had done more than just expose one corrupt police department. She had shattered an entire network of abuse that had terrorized the community. Now, there was a new atmosphere throughout Jefferson County, one of accountability, transparency, and genuine justice. The fear that had kept people silent was replaced by hope that the system could work for everyone. Judge Washington's work was complete. She had proven that when someone with authority and courage stands up to corruption, even the most entrenched systems can be transformed. At the federal courthouse in Birmingham, Judge Washington returned to her regular duties. Still, now she carried the additional respect of someone who had put her freedom on the line to expose injustice. The wedding she had been driving to attend that day had been postponed due to the federal investigation. Still, when it finally took place 2 months later, the entire community celebrated not just the marriage, but the courage of the judge who had changed their lives forever. In her chambers, Judge Washington kept a framed copy of the newspaper headline that had appeared the day after the arrests: "Federal Judge's Courage Exposes Decades of Police Corruption. 30+ officials arrested." She had learned that sometimes the most powerful people must be willing to appear powerless to expose the truth. Sometimes justice requires not just wearing the robes of authority, but being willing to take them off and stand with those who have no voice. If this story inspired you and showed you that one person's courage can change an entire system, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to see that justice is still possible. Don't forget to subscribe to Storyloom for more stories about the power of standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. Remember, real change happens when people in positions of power choose to use that power not to protect themselves, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves.